Welcome to our new episode of this series, Conversation Across Borders, with Francis and myself. Today we have Veronica Polinedro with us, and she is a user experience product designer, passionate about using empathy and design to improve lives for people. And today we're going to speak in particular about a big project that she has been working for a couple of years now, the welcome card. Veronica, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. So as said, my name is Veronica. I call myself a product UX designer. So that means that I work with product design and specifically user experiences methods to apply to digital products. And digital products is pretty much anything that, starts with a website or applications and kind of moves into the space of IoT, Internet of Things. So I've always kind of been in this specific space, but in my free time, I guess I want to say that I like to apply my practice and some of the insights that I have, specific to my industry, to some of the causes that I care the most for. And having had the opportunity to work with like social dignity projects, social impact project, the one that we're trying to solve with the welcome card is probably one of the topics that I'm most passionate about. So immigration, migration, and human flows. So with that said, I've been working a little bit all over the place, Sweden, United States, Italy, done a couple of projects in Central America, across Europe, and now I'm based in Cincinnati, Ohio, United States.
All of your time in Sweden and the United States, you've come up with this idea of a welcome card to help asylum seekers. People wonder what that means. Maybe you could just explain what the welcome card is.
Yeah. So the welcome card was a project that we started in 2016 in Stockholm, Sweden, where I was living at the time. During 2016, Sweden saw an increasing number of asylum seeking applications and migrants. And what that meant by 2016 is that we were about 4 years into the Syrian civil war. And by that time, applications for asylum seeking had not really duplicated. It had, if anything, multiplied by an enormous number. So what was happening was that we were seeing an increase in the handling time for applications and a real need for all nations in Europe, not necessarily just Sweden, to try and solve the handling time, and a little bit about how do we make sure that we welcome asylum seekers and migrants. And so the welcome card was really born out of a little bit of, a time for us as designers to kind of give back to the community, and specifically to the migrant community. A group of friends and I were all either, migrants in Sweden or in other countries. And what we wanted to do was try to apply some of the methods that we have, used in our practice of user experience design and digital design to try and solve what was happening at the time in Sweden. So the welcome card, to briefly describe it, is more than anything an approach to try to systemically solve one of the biggest issues in immigration, which is lack of access for its applicants and its users. So what we started with was a digital application that would leverage our knowledge that asylum seekers and migrants have access to digital tools such as mobile devices, and basically allow them to have better access to immigration tools. We accompanied that to a couple of tools for socializing, which basically meant allowing them to connect with public transportation and language courses, so that while they waited, we would be able to use that time to help them understand what Sweden and Swedish society really is all about. And now the welcome card, 4 years into it, has moved a little bit across the pond. So we're in the United States and we're trying to tackle something similar. So the idea now has a little bit shifted, but the core beliefs are the same. We're just trying to make immigration accessible for everyone.
Okay.
And Veronica, when you started here in Sweden, how did you come up with the idea, and how did you proceed to find a solution, let's say?
Yeah, so we started actually with what at the time was a workshop organized by the United Nations High Commissioner for the Refugees, so UNHCR, together with a design studio in Stockholm and what design can do. And the effort really was to get people in the social sector to come together and by applying human-centered design, trying to understand what is missing in the conversations that we're having about immigrations. And especially for Sweden, it was about what can any citizen really do to help tackle what at the time was called the European refugee crisis. So what we started with was applying human-centered design principles, which, if you're not familiar with human-centered design, it starts with empathy, with the idea that by asking questions, you can understand a little bit about what another person is experiencing, feeling, doing, and then using those insights to move into ideation, which basically means, creating as many ideas as possible. They can be as simple or as complex as you want them to be. Really, the sky is the limit, and the idea is to then filter these by creating very quick prototypes and putting them in front of the people that we got that initial, empathy and understanding from. So the idea is to really just validate some of the ideas that you create and then move them on to implementation. And by applying some of these principles.
Sorry, Veronica, this means that you asked really refugees. You had a conversation with them, and you come up. And what was missing? What was the conversation that was not made there?
Yeah, so part of the conversation and part of the workshop that we were doing with UNHCR was really getting to, bridge a little bit, the lack of understanding that most of us as citizens don't really know migrants or asylum seekers are going through. So we did talk with both refugees and asylum seekers, and the difference there is a little bit legal. The idea is that a refugee is someone who's already received protection, while an asylum seeker is somebody who's under the filing process of understanding whether or not they're deserving of that protection. And when I say deserving, is because it really is a very long process to get to basically, prove that you are in fact in need of international protection. So we did talk with asylum seekers and refugees, and some of the stories that they shared, varied. Everyone has a different reasons why they need to migrate. And some of the statistics that we see today have kind of proven that, the idea of an asylum seeker as someone who's running away from a conflict is very minute in comparison to all of the other reasons that exist for asylum seekers to, leave. Some might be women and children who need protection from a domestic abusive partner. Others are fleeing because of climate change. Others are fleeing from poverty. Others are fleeing from conflict and persecution. So the reasons are very different, and not one asylum seeker, refugee, or migrant has the same story. And so for us, the biggest understanding was realizing that when asylum seekers and refugees move to Sweden or to the United States, they're very often isolated to kind of like, the outskirts, the outer part of our community, of our societies. And what that means is that they are not only waiting for a really long period of time, not knowing what is happening with their immigration filing, but they're also socially distant from everyone else and not really understanding how can they fit in, how can they be part of this group. So the story is really varied, but the bottom line was that they really lacked some of the basic resources to understand how to move into Sweden or how to move into the United States. And this is true across all of the nations that we kind of have done, this analysis of. Immigrants, migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees really don't know where to start when it comes to immigration. It's made so complex and complicated that it's becoming really challenging.
Yeah, I think it's not just that migrants don't know that the general public don't know what they've been through. I just recently read a book, I don't know if you read it, called America Dirt, which is a story of a family who saw most of the family killed by Colombian drug gangs, and then the mother and the son came up through South and Central America into Arizona, actually, and the terrible things that they went through. People don't realize that. What made you realize that? I mean, what was it that motivated you? Did you have early experience of migrants and asylum seekers? What led you to take the path that you've taken?
So there's definitely a couple of reasons there why I am so attached to the cause, and also why I keep, having conversation with other asylum seekers, migrants, and refugees about immigration. For one, I've been an immigrant since I was 17. I have traveled, well, I've had the opportunity to travel and really move from Italy to the United States for studying, and then back from the United States to Sweden again for studying, and ended up staying there to work. And one of the things that I'm really aware of is the privilege that I hold in terms of accessing immigration. Immigration is being made so complicated that when you put immigration websites through what we call the learnability test, you very quickly realize that you will need 10 to 13 years of education to actually understand the content of those websites and those platforms, just from a purely linguistical perspective. So what that prompts me as a designer, as someone who really wants to promote ethical design movements, is the idea that we need to have more conversation with those that are marginalized in our societies. And for me, it's about having conversation with other asylum seekers, other migrants. And I think that naturally, when you are a migrant yourself, you will surround yourself with migrants, so you hear their stories. So for me, really, it does boil down to a combination of, my past, my experiences, and also wanting to understand how my experience compares to that of others.
Yes, and you already mentioned that you are using this human-centered approach, and empathy plays a big role, of course. And also, what was the result of using this approach for the developing of the welcome card in Sweden?
Well, I think that probably the biggest insight is actually understanding that we have very common needs and wishes as humans. Asylum seekers and migrants and refugees we're all kind of moving for very specific reasons. And the stories that, we bring with us, the experiences that we bring with us are very important to continue to build that, empathy, that understanding of what it means to either being forced to move or needing to move. Like I said, many of us have different reasons why we move. And when I say we, I mean migrants, those who do have the ability to move for study or for work, which is a much different story than those who move for persecution. So going back to empathy, I think that for me and for many of us in the project was about trying to share a little bit more the stories that asylum seekers and refugees are going through. And it's not necessarily to continue to portray the picture of the asylum seekers who needs international protections and needs to move, but it's about really pointing to some of the lacks of understanding that any of us as citizens have in terms of immigration. Like you said, many of us don't really know what it means to be a migrant, or what it means to needing or having to move to protect our families. And that is really something that we build by empathizing with another human being, and something that with every volunteer that we have had as part of the welcome card, it's something that we always try to foster, having conversation, having an open mind, an open heart, and sort of listen to other is not only like a huge empathy builder, but it's also something that helps us clarify some of the biggest misunderstanding that we have in immigration today. So really for me, empathy is about trying to bring a little bit more clarity as to why asylum seekers and refugees or migrants are needing to move, and trying to foster a little bit of that, emotional intelligence type of skill in every volunteer and every designer that helps us build in the welcome card.
But I guess that, the thing that you do working with migrants, that's only one side of the coin. The other side is the authorities that they have to deal with. I know Narina was interested in what happens in the UK. I'm not an expert on it, but I know that by the end of 2020, 35,000 migrants have come across, which is nothing like the rest of Europe. And we're far worse than the rest of Europe in dealing with it. They have to, report to authorities, get a case interview, and then they're told within 6 months whether they can stay or not. But 76% of them don't get told within 6 months, and they live on a pittance between £5 and £6 a week for food. And a lot of them go into desperate situations, and many go into human trafficking. So, I mean, when you're doing the welcome card, do you understand the resistance of the authorities that you have to get over, and maybe you don't have it as bad as we do, and also the plight of the asylum seeker and the migrant particularly, who sometimes get themselves in exceptionally difficult circumstances like trafficking?
Yeah, for sure. I think that that's something that we're dealing with, on a daily basis, whether it is during the storytelling or whether it is, in some of the work that we're trying to implement. So definitely there is some friction that exists with the organization, especially immigration organization, and very often political organizations that try to spread, the wrong message about asylum seekers and refugees. So the work for us there is not so much about focusing some of the roadblocks or the blockers that we face in terms of working or collaborating with some of the organizations, but it's really about trying to serve those that are the core of our values and principles, so asylum seekers, migrants, and refugees. With that said, I am aware that we need the cooperation of just about any organization, but very often if you can't have that, I think it's important to understand that we can get creative and work around them. It's a blocker that we have definitely, found not only in Sweden or the Netherlands, where we have tried, to have some of the analysis for how to implement the welcome card. It's something that we're seeing here in the United States too. Like the United States has very recently capped the number of asylum seekers to 30,000 a year, which is a record low in comparison to 2016, where the number was around 100,000, and previous administration had even higher capping numbers. So when you cap something that low, you kind of have to wonder, where does the friction exist there? And how can you think systemically about rethink that approach, rethink those conversations? So with that said, I think I am very aware that if, at a high level, an administration or an immigration agency has a different agenda, we need to be able to either influence that conversation or sort of, work around and figure out how is it that we can still serve those that we, have appointed as quote unquote our stakeholders.
And Veronica, in Sweden, you implemented a part of your vision for the welcome card, and this part should support refugees in following up the process that is going on for them. But you had other ideas about the welcome card that you would like to implement. Could you tell us a little bit about this, for example, cultural events or this aspect as well?
Yeah, so the idea of the welcome card was really founded on 3 pillars. So we had the idea that we could help, our users understanding the immigration process and how it is that they can quote unquote control it. And that's really just about informing them and connecting them to the right resources. And the second pillar was building the kind of funding that would allow us to provide them with access to public transportation. And that is because very often asylum seekers and refugees are sort of located in asylum centers, refugee centers that are very much outside of some of the bigger city centers that offer language programs or any type of resource that allows them to understand, what the cultural settings are. And then the third pillar was exactly that. How could we connect them better to cultural events? How could we connect them to social groups so that they could, at a very basic level, try to practice the language, especially when there is a language such as Swedish, which is not as as known. For us, we learned that this is really something that needs to be approached almost as equally. The three pillars are really three pillars in the sense that they are so equally standing, because without one or the other, the entire ecosystem wouldn't really work. They would collapse. So what we understood is that understanding immigration, having a sense of control over one's application, allows them to have access to public transportation and sort of focus on language, but they don't necessarily, they wouldn't exist without one another, because if you're worried about your immigration application, then you're not going to be able to focus on language learning. And if you don't have access to transportations, you're not going to be able to access those classes. So for us, it was really about trying to advance all three pillars at once, and making sure that our users really had access to all three of them in order to succeed.
Well, I mean, one of the things we haven't said is the welcome card itself isn't a sort of physical cardboard card. It's an app on the phone, isn't it? And it means to work, you can give the app to the asylum seeker, but the communities who will help out need the app as well. And the authorities who are going to be working with the asylum seeker need the app as well. Are they having that? Are the authorities picking up that app? Are they using it? And are communities using it as well?
Yeah, so definitely one of our first goals was definitely trying to shift the conversations away from the perception that asylum seekers or refugees are coming in with absolutely nothing, and that their digital competency is lower than that of any other citizen. That is such a misconception that was one of the first objectives that we had. So asylum seekers and refugees really are traveling with the same devices that we use every day, including mobile devices. In fact, if you look at some of the biggest needs in detention center, especially those in Greece or southern Italy, you'll see that one of the biggest needs is having access to electricity and Wi-Fi. Electricity so that they can charge their phone, and Wi-Fi so that they can connect with their families, their friends. So we knew that the digital competency, the ability to use a mobile device, was just as high as that of any of us. So knowing that, what we wanted to create was a tool that could also tap into existing infrastructure. So most of us have a phone, so most communities will have access to that type of app. And then when it comes to migration agencies, we also do know that they work with databases and computers, so it wouldn't be as difficult to tap into the infrastructure. Some of the obstacles, though, do remain that many asylum seeking, refugee or migrant applications still remain on paper. And that is something that has been more or less structured within the agencies themselves. So in the case of Sweden, the migration agency of Sweden deals with some digital resources, but not necessarily as many as as they could be. There's still a lot of paper filing. On the other hand, the United States is a very interesting case. Out of 100 applications that exist, 100 different forms to do immigrations, only 11 are digital. So the situation is a little bit different there. It changes country by country. Then if you look at Italy, there's almost zero digital access. But going back to your question, what we have realized, and that was part of our human-centered design process, really having conversation with just about anyone. So we didn't only talk to asylum seekers and refugees, we also talked with community members, and we talked with the immigration agency. And what we wanted to understand was, is there anything in common between these three groups that we could tap into to provide a solution that really met everyone's needs and wishes? And we found that digital platform was one of the solutions.
And you mentioned, of course, that there are differences among countries. Also, digitalizations is one of the differences, but there are many others. Now you are based in the USA and you are continuing this idea there. What are the differences between, let's say, Sweden and the USA, and what are the challenges that you are, and the vision that you have now in the USA for the welcome card?
Yeah, so now that we have shifted over to the United States, which happened a little bit because I moved to the United States, when I made the move from Europe to the United States, I went through a 23-month process in order to get my visa permit. And during those 23 months, I had a lot of time to think about what was missing for me, what could be improved in this process. So what we have done here in the United States that is a little bit different from what we were doing in Sweden is dropping two of the pillars of the welcome card, so the transportation and the social events. And that is because the infrastructures are a little bit different in the United States than they are in Europe. Public transportation isn't as popular of an option as it is in Europe. Social events do exist, but they exist differently, right? So for us, knowing that one of the pillars was just as scalable, which was the access to immigration resources and that case management, we needed to understand a little bit what were the other pillars that would work with with the context that we're in right now. So it was a combination of starting a little bit from scratch, but scaling the part of the product that we didn't know was missing for just about any immigration system in any country in the world. So here in the United States, we are focusing quite some on that learnability aspect that I mentioned just a little bit ago, which is the fact that the immigration website is so complicated to understand that I had a hard time understanding what the immigration process for myself was. And so knowing that human-centered design work, knowing that design thinking work, and knowing that that digital aspect was also working in Europe, we brought those over and started the project from scratch, in a sense, having conversation with migrants and asylum seekers, trying to understand, again, what are their needs, what are their wishes, what are the infrastructure that exists for them, and how can we then use those for the welcome card over here. So right now we're really just focusing on what is called an immigration path. How can we help asylum seekers and migrants understand which of the 100 plus forms on the immigration website is the one or the ones that they need in order to complete their immigration process?
I mean, it's quite interesting when you said that you had to start from scratch and build things up. If someone from England, myself, someone else in one of the refugee groups said, look, I'm really interested in, what you're doing. I mean, how would they start from scratch? And could they come to you for help in starting up?
So we are not a legal entity, not an immigration legal entity, and we do not intend to replace those legal entities. And some of the lawyers that are working, especially those that are working pro bono and are really working on advocacy for immigration and asylum seekers. So we don't necessarily replace that type of consultation on a one-to-one type of case. What we're trying to do is help facilitate that process of understanding what immigration path they need to take. So ideally, independently of the type of user or the type of immigration user that you are, you could come to our platform. You could tell us a little bit about yourself, which really we're just trying to understand, where you're currently located, what is your main need for immigration at this time in the United States, and then a little bit about your age, just because laws change a little bit if you're under 18 or you're over 18. And then based on just, a couple of inputs of this type, we could tell you which forms out of the hundreds that are on the website you need to take in order to file for immigration, for your exact type of immigration. And then what we also plan to do is that we do want to help you connect with some of the pro bono lawyers that are helping with immigration. So one of the things that we do ask is where you're located, what's your zip code, and based on that, we can help them connect with some of these law offices that are advocating for immigration and to help you with that consultation part. But the idea is that when you're starting your journey in immigration in the United States, not really knowing where you are, this could be the kind of tool that gets you at least 50% of the way there, trying to understand which one is the right path for you, and then helping you file for that immigration form.
Veronica, do you see possibilities to develop these ideas for other countries, or work with other countries or other organizations, because it sounds to me like a simple way to improve in a great and huge way the life of many people. And I'm wondering, how is it possible?
Yeah, and actually one thing that I forgot to say just a second ago was that if there are migrant or asylum seekers or refugees that are sort of waiting right now who want to get involved, we always try to build that type of inclusivity, you know, and diversity in our team, so that anyone could come and help us by sharing, you know, their experiences, so that we can actually build them into this algorithm, into this, you know, way for us to understand the process. And in fact, going back to your question, the idea is that this could be scaled just about in any country. What the initial analysis that we did across, you know, the globe was really trying to understand which are the major countries that are currently, you know, seeing an influx of migrants. And these are more or less, you know, any Northern or Central European country, North America, which would be both the United States and Canada, and Australia for the other side of the world. And all of these, you know, are facing very different situations, of very different numbers of, you know, incoming asylum seekers, refugees, or migrants for a variety of reasons. But what we do understand is that they're all lacking the type of infrastructure that really helps facilitate immigration, whether it's because of a combination of, you know, real obstacle at implementing better solution, or if it is because of political friction. Many countries are seeing antiquated immigration systems that lack digital services, the type of digital services that, you know, we are able to access on almost like a daily basis in our country. Like, you know, if you need to register your vehicle, more or less any country has some sort of, you know, digital solution. If you need to send a package, there's a digital solution for that, but there isn't a digital solution for immigration. And what that really means is that by relying on paper, by relying on some of the most antiquated system that, you know, we have used for many decades, that means that stuff gets lost, originals get lost, and lives really get compromised as a consequence of that. So back to your question, yes, it most definitely could get scaled in just about any country.
Okay, well, we sort of come to the end of our half hour, and I think you've been really, you know, informative. And I think if people in this country or other countries wanted to, you know, develop a welcome card and work with you, I think they would be really keen to contact you. And so thank you for coming on. And Marina has well, the person who's invited you, which is fantastic. It's a great interview. So I'm going to hand over to Marina to finish it off.
No, I thank you, Francis and Veronica, for being here. I feel that, you know, this one of the most important aspects for me is really to learn to ask the people that are involved in this what they really need, also to start seeing the people who are involved and not thinking about data or numbers, but really see the lives beyond the data. And I think that, I'm sure, Francis, what do you say, that we are going to follow up the development of the welcome card, and we would be more than happy to see it develop in other countries. And
I think if we could find people in this country and other countries who wanted to do it, we could set up a sort of startup webinar with Veronica, if she'd be willing to do it, and see what comes from that. That would be a great idea.
Yes, I think that it would be great. Veronica.
Yeah, and I just want to close by saying that, you know, I'm not an expert in this. I'm just somebody who found themselves in this kind of like, you know, conundrum that is immigration. I am by no means whatsoever the only immigrant to have a story of a challenge with the immigration agency. I'm just one that has a platform, and I'm aware of that. So I would love to continue to, you know, spread the message that if there are others out there, and our team does include other immigrants that have gone through similar experiences. So if you are a migrant and you feel like you do want to, you know, be part of this team, help us build this vision. It's not my vision. It's really just something that I would like to see by the end of my life somewhat implemented, so that, you know, generations after me don't have to go through some of the insane heartbreaks that immigration puts you through. And for me, my heartbreak, really was about being separated from my husband for just about a year after we got married in order to enter the United States. But mine is, uncomparable story to those who are fleeing persecution, domestic abuse, conflict. So if you are an immigrant and want to help us build the vision, I would love to have you as part of the team. And thank you for letting me speak about the welcome card.
Well, thank you for actually doing it, because, it has been something that a lot of us didn't know was happening, and it is an important development which would help both authorities, asylum seekers and communities build the bridges that they need to build. So, thank you very much for doing it. And thank you, Narina, for inviting Veronica. It's been really fantastic. So, yeah, we'll end this interview now.